Well, welcome to our noontime webinar. Cheapers, David. You've had you well shorn. I look like I need to be shorn. This lockdown is getting a little bit embarrassing now, I suppose, for some of us. But how did you manage to get through the past week or so? Because it really has been. Now it's getting beyond a joke for many people.
It's very difficult. I think we miss the personal contact. While I'm quite comfortable here and got all the computers and access to as much news as I want, I think you miss chatting to people in the office. You miss the social contact. I find it very difficult. And I miss my family. And Alec, the one thing is that you don't know when we're going to come out of this, and that uncertainty is difficult. You know, it's someone described it like waiting for a bus. You know, if you know the bus is late and it's going to come in 5 minutes, you're okay, you're relaxed. If you don't know whether it's coming at all, you get into a state of anxiety. And I think that's a difficult with all of us. We don't know when we're coming out. We're in a state of anxiety of trying to understand, you know, what comes next or where we are. So I miss the office. I miss walking up and down Melrose Arts and greeting all those people who are having coffee on the side and not going to work, you know. So, you know.
Well, I'm sure that you're going to get your full fix today, because we've got lots of people who've joined us today. We've usually the Rational Radio recording via this webinar is only open to Biznews Premium members. The reason for that is that there are just so many questions that we won't be able to get through all of them if it's an open house. However, today we have a subject of national interest. We're going to talk about the political economy. We're going to be talking first with Frans Cronje from the Institute of Race Relations, and then the leader of the official opposition, John Steenhuisen. And in both cases, these guys have been agitating very, very strongly for an end to the lockdown. David Shapiro, as always, is with us to give us some insights into the way the investment markets are working. But before we get into any of this, we'd like to know if you can hear us. So there's a little hand signal there. So if you wouldn't mind, just if you can hear us loud and clear, please click on the little hand there so I can see the hands. Oh, there they're going up. Very nice. Thank you very much. So that we've got. Thank you very much. So you can hear us loud and clear. If at any point in time you'd like to pose a question to David or Frans, or later on to John Steenhuisen, then the easiest way to do it is just to type it in down the bottom. There were a few little questions here about sound really bad, etc. I hope that's improved. I've pushed up the levels a little to make sure that that is better. If it still is a concern or an issue, Becky, Gail, John, Gail says it's sorted. John says fine. Okay, good. Everybody's getting the tech now. Everybody's got the sound. We see that David Shapiro has been looking over. I asked him to have a look at something today, which really was quite staggering, David. The news coming out of Steinhoff that the chair, Heather Son, has stepped down with immediate effect because of some irregularity. Now, you need to unpack this for us, because by now you'd hope that the irregularities at Steinhoff would be coming to some end.
We would have thought so. And, you know, whoever's remained or whoever is remaining at Steinhoff has got so much ahead of them. There's so much to do. And I think Heather came out as one of these people who has promised that they would adhere to strong governance regulations and strong governance issues. And they would run the companies properly, you know. And what she discovered is that 2 years ago, when Steinhoff went in, when the troubles arose in December 2017, she picked up a transaction that was in the Viceroy report. And she's a director of a certain company. If we start to mention the companies, it's going to become very difficult to know where you are. So I'm going to try and summarize it. But Alec, go back to 2 years. What the investigators found, and I'm going to put this in a very simple form as well, is that Steinhoff was lending money to certain businesses, and those businesses would then bring back the money or do transactions with Steinhoff. So in one case, you were lending money and you were creating a debtor, someone who owed you money. But the money that went to that company would come back and into the income account in some way, in some kind of transaction, boosting their income. So they, in effect, were round tripping their own money to boost their income. That was a lot of the transactions were around that kind of situation, or that kind of transaction. And what Heather found is that there was one business that she was involved that entered into a transaction with another company, and she found in that other company was a director who had been named in the Viceroy report. And she asked PwC to please investigate this, because if that was the case, she would have to make certain disclosures. So 2 years down the line, they found that there was some irregularities in that deal, and because she didn't make the disclosures at the time, she has stepped down as saying, listen, I was involved, unwittingly was involved, and therefore because of that I'm standing down, because obviously it's going to be embarrassing to her. It's difficult to get into the intricacies. I don't think that really matters, but she's done what the right thing is. Listen, I was involved in this company. It's an irregular contract. I'm not personally guilty for it, but because of that, I have to step down.
So a couple of things jump out at me here. First, Heather Son is honorable and noble and has done the right thing, which many people involved in Steinhoff have failed to do over the years. But the second thing, and perhaps more relevant from a broader perspective, is that PwC are clearly still investigating this thing. If it's only just come to that.
Well, it's 2 years. It's 2.5 years. In the US, when Madoff was found guilty of those transgressions, it took 2-3 months. He's in jail. Here, this is 2.5 years. Marcus is carrying on life, probably normally. I don't know what's happening down in Stellenbosch, whether he's still seen. Obviously, we're all in lockdown, so perhaps he's not seen. But this should have been put to bed a long, long time ago. And it just shows you, how many transactions were involved. And that raises other issues. What's the cost going to be to what remains of Steinhoff? It's only at about 4.5 billion now. It has a market cap from, the hundreds of billions that it was. But still, they're trying to resurrect, they're trying to keep those businesses going. But Alec, a web of intrigue that only Marcus could actually have spun. So difficult to undo all of these.
Good for Heather taking the decision that she did. However, on the other hand, I'm sure they're going to miss her, because you don't need someone who's been intimately involved as she has been to leave the scene, but you have to understand why. David, Sibanye Gold and Neil Froneman. Neil's always been outspoken, but he seems to be more outspoken than normal lately, particularly in the last few days, calling for the end of the lockdown, saying that it's going to cause irreparable economic harm. He wants the mines to get back working again. We're going to be talking about lockdown a lot in this webinar and the one that we have on Thursday. But from an investor's point of view, if the lockdown were to end, and clearly the way the ANC is going, that doesn't seem to be likely, but if it were to end, would investors celebrate?
Oh, and how? Of course they would. They'd be nervous. Personally, they'll be nervous, but they'll celebrate. Everybody's going to go out there very carefully, but they will get their social lives back. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it. I've got a son in Australia. I've got 2 brothers in Australia. I've got a daughter in America. And you can understand their attitudes. And in Australia, people are slowly going back to restaurants. It's under control. The restaurant will only take 10 people instead of 20, spaces them out, and you've got to book a table and that. But I think with confidence, economic activity and confidence will return. I was listening to Jay Powell yesterday. He was on CBS in America, and he said only when there's a vaccine will people feel 100% confident. But in the meantime, I think that things will pick up, and in a slow fashion. But sure, we'll celebrate.
Well, Chin Spanner has just informed us that Steinhoff is up 1% today, so that's something on the right side there. I'll be having a look.
From 100 to 101.
Yeah, wow, but Frans Cronje is joining us now. He's the chief executive of the Institute of Race Relations. Frans, I know you've been having connectivity issues, but if you unmute your microphone, that should give us we should be able to hear you. Okay, I'm going to do that while we talk, David. While we're waiting for Frans Frans, you should.
In my just for clarity, I'm not Frans Cronje. I am his designated person at this stage due to the technical difficulties, but he is also trying to join the call. Apologies, I seem to have stolen his identity, and I don't know whether that's a fireable offence at the Institute of Race Relations.
All right, so we know who you are, Hermann, and thank you very much for doing that. Hopefully a little later in the call, we will be able to be talking with your colleague. In essence, the two of you work very closely together, so I'm sure you can give us the insights or the thoughts that you have about what's going on with the lockdown to start with, and what's going on with the ANC. And maybe let's start with the ANC as the spearhead of the topic. In the past few days, you guys have been saying that the ANC might actually not come back from this. In other words, it could lose power as a result of the damage that it's doing to the economy. Just unpack that for us, if you would, please, Hermann.
Yeah, so the thing is, as early as 2012, the Institute of Race Relations made the point that the ANC is looking at a defeat in the year 2024. And it was a strange thing to claim then, and people might think it's a strange thing to claim now, especially if you take into account that in 2012, the ANC had just turned 100 years old. We were still very much in a recovery, in a positive growth area, at least after the global collapse in 2008 and 9. So the reason we made that call then, and the reason we are sticking to that call, is essentially the ANC is on the wrong side of three mega trends, and these are mega trends that Frans he discusses in his books, and these three trends boil down to the first to the defeat of the ANC inevitably. Firstly, you're looking at a country where the voter is becoming younger and younger, and if you look at the ANC, their support is predominantly among older South Africans. Secondly, you are looking at a country that is urbanizing at a significant rate. And if you look at the ANC support, you see it's predominantly, or running the risk at least, of becoming a predominantly rural party. And then thirdly, you're looking at the education trends in South Africa. Now, a lot can be said about the negative aspects of education in South Africa, and we've been saying a lot about that, and the problems are actually quite clear. But what's also clear is that you are now looking at an education system vastly improved from 30 years ago. In the year 1990, the number of black engineering graduates from university was negligible, and in the year 2018, that number is actually now double the size of white graduates with engineering degrees, and the number of white graduates with engineering degrees hasn't really gone down. It's remained quite stable. So you've got a situation where perhaps despite some of the significant challenges and failures of the ANC government on education, the country is becoming more educated. More people are getting a matric than ever before. More people are going to university than ever before. So if you look at the three trends that I mentioned, age, urbanization, and education, the ANC is really on the wrong side of all three of those. And the call might have been tenuous early on, but after 2012, the successive elections in terms of municipal and national, 2014, 2016, 2019, confirmed our understanding of the data. It correlated to a weakening of the ANC's support. So I hope that answers your question. Another interesting aspect that one can perhaps look at going perhaps later in the chat is the fact that if the ANC voters if the ANC is in electoral trouble, on what basis do ANC voters actually vote ANC? And that's I think a very controversial point, perhaps in the South African parlance of political understanding.
Well, it's unusual for us to be talking, as we will be today, about the political economy, but the real reason for that is because of the lockdown, and every bit of information that we're getting from the real economy is that the damage is massive. At least 1 million people will be permanently unemployed as a consequence of this, and many small businesses are going belly up. How are you guys at the IRR reading the impact of the lockdown? And maybe just go back to the beginning, where most people thought it was a good idea, the initial 3 weeks, but there's very divided opinion thereafter. Where are you seeing it?
I think it would be disingenuous to retroactively or retrospectively try to cover oneself in glory with the initial call of the lockdown and saying, oh, we were against it then. Many of my colleagues, I think, were mostly perhaps not in favor of the lockdown, but could certainly understand the prudence of it. In politics, I think it's very cruel to hold people to standards that only developed after the fact. At that time, the lockdown seemed prudent. We didn't know a lot about the infection rates, the mortality rates, the comorbidities. So at the time, we perhaps not supported the lockdown, but we certainly understood its prudence. Perhaps personally, I could say that I supported it. The initial 3 weeks seemed, to my mind, to be prudent. And I think part of why I could say I supported it is if you told businesses that for 3 weeks there's going to be this massive interruption of economic activities, and you have to find a way to survive these 3 weeks, the government, the banks, the financial sector will try to help you. But if there's a very definite terminator of a short period of uncertainty, I think the economy can, buffer that to a certain extent. Perhaps not, get through it without any damage or without casualties, but could survive it. However, the problem then after those 3 weeks became, right, we've had the lockdown. What was the purpose of the lockdown? We heard two things. Firstly, to push the peak of the virus to September. Now that made sense to me. Secondly, to put in place the necessary testing and tracing infrastructure and equipment. And that also made sense. But the problem was that the second point did not happen. Our testing and tracing window that we wanted to buy did not happen. In fact, if you look at the numbers in the first few days of the lockdown, there was actually a delay, and it took us a few weeks to really get to the ramping up stage, and we aren't really where we need to be. So initially, the lockdown seemed prudent, but I think it was a wasted opportunity. We didn't achieve what was prudent. And if we listen to the experts, they seem to think that we've gotten all we can from the lockdown.
Hermann, thank you for stepping in for Frans Cronje at the last minute, as you have. We are now going to pick up with John Steenhuisen, who I see has joined us a little earlier than anticipated. He's the leader of the Democratic Alliance in Parliament. But before we do that, David, if you'd like to just come back for a minute and just from the investors' point of view, what would investors be wanting to see in the way that South Africa's economy is handled? And the way that Hermann put it, I think is pretty clear. Most people did feel that the initial lockdown was good, but the opinion now is swung completely against it.
Simply because the extent of the losses. Initially we were talking about GDP falling 4%, 5%. Suddenly we're now starting to talk about 15 to 20%. We're starting to talk about more and more people out of jobs. The worry is, the longer this goes on, the more difficult it is to bring back the workforce. You know, as Hermann said, 3 weeks was easy. You know, that's nothing more than a holiday. That's December holidays and that. But once we start going longer, we're now in 7, 8 weeks, etc. People start to feel insecure. Businesses are collapsing faster than we can imagine, and they're the kind of small businesses. These are not the big businesses that have got the economic power to handle this. These are very small businesses, and so it goes. And as one tumbles, it's literally like dominoes. So the effect is felt through the economy. So the quicker we bring back people, the better it's going to be for their economy. And Alec, don't look at the stock exchange as being a proxy for what's happening in the economy. The stock exchange is made up of big mining companies and big internationals like Prosus and Naspers and so on, big businesses that have got nothing to do with the underlying economy. Look at the banks that will, and retailers. That will start to give you an idea of what's happening in the economy here.
There was a question that was emailed to me this morning, Dave, before we go into a pile of other questions that we have here. But I think I'm going to wait for John to join us before we pick up on those. This one was, how many companies will not be paying out annual bonuses this year?
I think virtually all. I think, and if you do, you know, one's going to wonder whether you profiteered or not. I think, Alec, we're more worried about dividends. And understand, by not paying dividends, how many people rely on that income. As a person who deals with private clients, you know, there are many. You'll find a retiree who's had all his money in Pick and Pay, you know, for many years, and that provides him the income that pays his rent and so on. And suddenly, Pick and Pay are not paying a dividend. And you realize the consequences that this is going to have on his life. Yes, he can sell some shares and he can make money, etc. But it's a very insecure situation, and we're getting that right through the economy. Or little businesses not paying, big businesses, sorry, that are not paying dividends as well. So understand, you know, what this is going to happen. I don't think anybody's been able to put this together or understood where we would be. We went into this blind anyway.
Well, the banks also are not allowed to actually pay dividends. John Steenhuisen is, I hope, with us. John, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
But we can indeed. If you just click your little movie camera, we should be able to see you as well.
There we go. How's that?
Fantastic. There you are. Nice and clear. Lovely to see you, John. Thanks for joining us. Fine, man. We've got a very large audience. I see it's sitting, Dave. What's it? 726 people right now who are listening to you, which for a webinar is quite sizable. It's what we become used to. Guests.
I need them these days when I get interviewed. A list of people who I'm talking to and for.
You've been boxing a lot lately, but I guess your constituency would be pretty happy to see that you are standing up for what you and the DA believe in.
Yeah, well, I mean, boxing for the right reason. You know, I think that you know, we've been very constructive since the beginning of this process. You know, we supported the president in the hard lockdown, but the divergence started when, you know, we realized that the extending the hard lockdown was going to have dire economic consequences, and that there was actually a twin threat to lives in South Africa of, one, the spread of the virus, but two, the effects of a grinding economic depression on many South Africans. And that we warned at the time, and it was a very unpopular thing to do, if you remember that, the collective outrage that met the statement when we said it's going to destroy the economy. But now I think you battle to open a newspaper or any publication. It's not talking about the dual threat to lives in South Africa of the virus and an economic collapse.
The thing that I think confuses most of us who are on the outside, not on the inner portals of power, is that some of the strange decisions that have been taken. For instance, you're only allowed to exercise from 6 to 9. For instance, we've seen the numbers. In fact, we had it in our flash briefing this morning that 9 out of 10 smokers are getting their cigarettes. They're just buying it illegally. So the state's losing on excise duty, and criminals are being given an opportunity to get a foothold in this market. How do you perhaps get some sense into a government which, according to the Nobel Prize winner that we've been talking to, Professor Michael Levitt, the South African, says that they are doing these kind of crazy things just because they can. In other words, they're showing you that that the regime is powerful. How do you, as a leader of the opposition, fight this?
Well, what we did is from the beginning, we made a number of suggestions. First of all, we put forward a blue book, which was a ministry by ministry approach to what needed to be done to fight the virus. And then obviously we released our smart lockdown model, which we thought was the right way to go. And certainly our next level had a much wider opening up of the economy. But I think that the analysis is probably right. I think that there's a lot of autocratic and technocratic and bureaucratic behavior that has seeped in that has actually got nothing to do with fighting the virus. Now, any regulation should be measured against its efficacy in fighting the virus. Many of these regulations, the military curfew, the limit on exercise, in fact, I think it's actually counterproductive because you're basically getting every South African out onto the streets at the same time, when and forcing people to congregate. And then Bheki Cele moans that there's the Sea Point Promenade or other areas are too congested. Well, what do? You get 3 hours where everybody's out on the streets. The ridiculous diktat that came out last week about what clothes you can buy and how you must wear them. The ban on cooked food, the ban on e-commerce. We've made submissions to government. They haven't listened, and so we've now, as you probably know, are going to court. Our papers were lodged last week. We're going to challenge the e-commerce has fallen away now because government did a U-turn on it, but the military curfew and the exercise. And then we've got a direct approach to the Constitutional Court on the constitutionality of the Disaster Management Act, which is allowing the NCC to basically make laws, make regulations with absolutely no oversight from any elected public representative in South Africa. Now, we have a executive arm in South Africa, and we've got a legislative arm. The executive is the cabinet, and the legislature is parliament. And parliament has just been left completely out of these processes, and that's why you've seen these ministers behaving like tin pot dictators in a totalitarian society. We're a democracy, and our democratic processes must be allowed to continue.
John, just unpack that for us, because that really goes to the heart of what's aggravating many South Africans. There is a lockdown which has been imposed on the country by this, as you say, the executive branch. Are you wanting to prove that it's illegal, or are you wanting to prove that the process of the lockdown was illegal?
No, I think that what we want to do is to fix the loophole that currently exists, where there's absolutely no oversight of what the NCC is allowed to do. The NCC is doing the National Command Council that was established. That's where all these rules and regulations are coming from. They are using the Disaster Management Act to argue that they're empowered to make laws and regulations. We believe there's a massive gap in this, because even in the State of Emergency Act, there is a provision there for parliamentary oversight. You have to go back to Parliament when you want to extend. There has to be a process that Parliament exercises oversight. In the Disaster Management Act, there's no provision whatsoever for oversight. And we saw in the letter that Cassius Lebisi wrote back to that group of advocates, where he argued that no, there is oversight. The NCC is, is oversighted by the cabinet. Now, you can't have an executive organ of state exercising oversight over itself. It's fundamentally unconstitutional. It goes to the heart of the separation of powers debate. And I still maintain that if many of these regulations had an opportunity for Parliament to have a say, I think we could have stopped some of the lunacy that's going on. The cigarette and alcohol ban. Government is losing billions of rands every month in revenues at a time when we need that money to help pay for the medical response, but also to help us try and keep our economy afloat, which looks increasingly unlikely. And here you're essentially saying to the mafia, here we go, it's all your money. And to try and then get legal compliance again afterwards, after you've let this network run amok for months, is just simply not going to happen.
I have many questions, but the purpose of this webinar is that our community get to ask the questions. And the first one for you comes from Gerrit van den Doel, who says the lockdown should have been in 3 phases, not 5. Do you agree?
Well, we had a 4-phase lockdown, our smart lockdown model, but our step down from the hard lockdown was basically allowing you, any business in the country that could practice PPE, social distancing, and screening testing of employees should be allowed to open. I mean, there's this ridiculous argument where government now decides what businesses are important for the economy. Every business is important to the economy. Every business is a lifeline for families to be able to provide for themselves. So the smart lockdown model at that time was the right way to go. But what government then went to do was essentially extend the hard lockdown into their level 4. It's now exactly the same as the hard lockdown, except there's a military curfew and 3 hours of yard time for citizens, in the morning when most people actually can't get out at that particular time. So they basically extended the hard lockdown, and next week I think we will go into being the longest in hard lockdown of any other country, including Wuhan province and Italy, in terms of the time frame that we would have been in a hard lockdown, and it's come at a massive cost. So we had a 4-phase approach, but a lot less restrictive and draconian at the time here, because we've got to recognize the system. It's going to be about managing the virus, and I think that's what a lot of people don't get. I had a Twitter spat with Richard Callan last week, and he said, yeah, but it's irresponsible to call for the opening up of the economy. The problem is hard lockdown is a strategy used to buy you time to prepare yourself. You're never going to chase the virus away. It's waiting for us behind the door. We've been very good at hiding from it, but we've got to open the door sometime and confront it. It's going to be with us for 24 months. So we've got to have a management strategy, not a hard lockdown. And this hard lockdown has come at a terrible cost to the South African economy, billions of loss. And I think it's going to take us many, many years to recover from the damage that has been done by the extension of the hard lockdown. But even in our phase,
are you able to quantify? Have you been able? I know you've got a big team of researchers there to quantify what this lockdown is costing every week, every day.
Around about 13 billion rand per day was the estimate that was given to us, and I think that was it mirrored what the figures that came out of the National Treasury, figures that they gave to Parliament. So it's a significant cost, and this is what government's about. It's about making trade-offs and decisions. But what this government has done is, hard lock down the economy to the extent now where it is virtually suffocated. And there are businesses that are closing every day that are never going to reopen. I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is, that this is the small hill. COVID is the small hill. We'll get over it. There'll be a vaccine eventually down the line. There'll be a treatment. But now what's waiting South Africa on the other side of that hill is a massively steep mountain to climb to get the economy right. We're already low in the water going into it. COVID is now broken over the bow, and we're really in a very, very bad place. And I think there's going to be some big questions that get asked at the end of this. Why were we so low in the water going in? We've been in 6 years of technical recession, and also why, when the country went to open the larder to get the stored food, it's been eaten away by the rats and mice through state capture. So there's been very little money for government to match what other governments around the world are doing in terms of keeping the economy floating and getting money into the system. The response in South Africa has mainly been driven by corporate and private money.
Linda Horsfield wants to know, does anyone else think that the government is deliberately trying to collapse the economy because it is white controlled? They can then eradicate the Western Cape and achieve radical economic transformation in one fell swoop. I know it's conspiracy-ish. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma gave us insight in one of the publications where she wrote about class suicide, and that sometimes it's needed. But it's very foolish and a very silly way to go, because government's not going to have any revenue if this wide-scale business collapses. And if you suddenly think that a white business that fails is then going to be picked up and run successfully by a black person in a very difficult economic time, they're being quite silly, which is also why we've taken a very hard line against the racialization of the relief funding, not providing sectoral relief to white-owned businesses that are not BE compliant. Many of them employ black employees, and by collapsing that business, you're actually creating a very, very difficult time for many employees, the majority of whom are Black South Africans. So it just simply doesn't make sense. But I mean, we're going to keep on fighting to make sure that that does not happen, and that we're able to plot a way forward for South Africa. And I think there is an opportunity for us to now jettison some of the terrible policies that led to us being so low in the water going into this crisis. And I think government, if it doesn't have a strong look at itself, is going to find itself in a very, very difficult position, because, if you carry on doing what you did ahead of going into this into the crisis, and you just simply double down on the paradigm of state control and state monopoly and the state above all else, you try and get that in a depressed economic environment, it's a recipe for disaster.
Loretta Tunnicliffe asked a question which follows on from that, I guess. Why does the panel, which is you, John, that the government is seemingly stubbornly not listening? And also for the legal fraternity, why did they not use the International Health Regulations Act as opposed to the Disaster Management Act?
I think government panicked in the beginning, and maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. We didn't know what was happening, and that's why I supported the hard lockdown, hard lockdown early. But what that does is give you time to plan your response. I think government doesn't know what to do going forward, and I think they lack the courage to take the next step of opening up the economy and trying to get business moving again, so that you don't end up with people dying of starvation. I think many more people are going to die from malnutrition, starvation, exposure, depression due to the loss of their livelihoods and their homes and everything, than the virus would ever have affected. And that's a terrifying thought. But I also think that they're making a mistake in that in times like this, and let's be fair, we haven't been through something like this before. There's a lot of unknowns. But when the science starts moving and it starts telling you new things, you've got to adapt to that. And the science is telling us now, and all the panel advisors are saying hard lockdown cannot continue. You need to start opening up the economy. And there's just this dogged determination from government not to do it. And I think they're worried because there is going to be a spike, and we must all accept that there's going to be a spike. Ours are still coming. Other countries have been through theirs. So the virus is going to grow and spread, but by now we should have used this hard lockdown to massively roll out testing and our preparation for what is to come down the road. And that's why here in the Western Cape, they converted the ICC into an 800-bed hospital, preparing for that to take place. But we haven't sadly tested at nearly the levels we should have been testing. We've just went over the 400,000 mark last week, not nearly enough. The turnaround time on testing is still way too long, so that by the time you test someone positive, to go and track them and everyone they've come into contact with is way too late. So we've actually squandered the hard lockdown by not using it to prepare adequately and not to roll out a massive testing, tracing and tracking campaign.
You talk about the spike. What are your numbers in the DA? What are the mortality figures that you believe are likely through COVID-19? The initial ones were somewhere, well, there were some crazy ones to begin with, but the more sensible ones were around 80,000 people would die in this country. Is that aligned with what you're thinking of?
I think that what has been consistent with all the models is that they've overestimated the number of deaths. I think that in country, and that's because the science is moving. And it's they've been able to lower those. We are doing some more modelling now. We've in consultation with some of the immunologists and virologists who are we're helping us with our smart lockdown model. But certainly the consensus is that it's going to be way less than what we originally thought that the death rate was going to be. And that's why it's important to listen to the science when it's changing. And one of the biggest mistakes Thabo Mbeki made was not listening to the changing science around HIV/AIDS and antiretrovirals. And millions of people died as a result of that, unnecessarily so. And that's what happens if you don't keep up with the science and adapt your position and not dig your heels in just to make a political point, rather than actually looking at what the experts and the scientists are actually saying.
Sizwe Belu, as it's a political question, but I think it's relevant. He says, how are you, John, going to convince black people who voted for the DA because of the centre-right policies, but ditched it in the last election, specifically because of their support for BEE and affirmative action policies versus an empowerment policy at an organization like the Institute of Race Relations?
Well, look, I mean, we had a terrible election, the last election, and part of the reason for that is that people looked at the DA and didn't know who we were, what we were about, and what we were fighting for. I think the party drifted ideologically, and I think that we, stopped doing the job that we should have been doing in South Africa, which is putting on the table alternatives and being solutions-oriented, and certainly that's been the orientation of the party since I took over as interim leader. We've had that internal review panel report, which took a good hard look at the DA and made some recommendations about what we should do and how we need to fix it. So I think that in terms of, I think political parties have to be signposts and not weather vanes. Signposts stand rigidly, pointing the way into a direction. Everybody knows where you're pointing and why you're pointing that way. Weather vanes just spin in the political wind and end up being nothing to anybody. And the two parties that did well in the last election, on both the left and right of the spectrum, were parties that were able to set out unambiguously and clearly who they were and what they were about and what they were fighting for. The DA's got to do that, and we've got to do it by putting on our own ideas. And I think that during this crisis, you've seen that come to the fore. We're the only political party in the spectrum that's been putting on the table ideas, solutions, evidence-backed research, models, etc., not responding to what the ANC are doing, but this is our own stall. And I think that when we set out our own stall and we get our opponents to play on our frames, that's when we're going to win. So I don't want us to be a party that bangs on about how bad the ANC is. I want us to be the party that's saying this is the way forward for South Africa. This is the way out of the mess. And these are the tools which we're going to use to do it, and then to paint that in spectacular technicolor for voters. And I think that many of the people who are unsure about the DA in the last election, who we broke trust with, will come back. And I think that we'll win the trust of many people who've never even thought about voting for the DA before. And I'm reminded here what happened to Winston Churchill, after leading Great Britain through its darkest hour of the Second World War. Within 3 or 4 months of the end of the war in Europe, he was turfed out of office by opponents that were better able to own the recovery and own the future. That's the space that DA's got to play, and we've got to set out the blueprint for how we get South Africa out of the mess it's in and onto a path of growth and prosperity again through our own ideas and our own solutions.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have a chance to talk about that, certainly at least towards the end, because the mess we're in is just going to get, from the economist's perspective, is going to get worse and worse. But we've got many questions for you, John. Martin Urry wants to know, does the COVID Command Council include any DA members?
No, not at all. And I think the president's missed a big trick here. In a time of crisis, what he should have done, I think, is try and get as many political parties on board, particularly given the pain that's to come. And you said we're going to deal with that near the end. There's a lot of pain still to come from this, and it's going to be economic pain, and it's going to cut very, very deep into the country. And for the very first time, the middle class, I think, are going to start to feel pain. And I think that the president would have been better advised to spread that pain out and almost create a national command council of national unity. Instead, the last time I heard from the president was 20 days ago in a Zoom where I had advised him not to release 19,000 prisoners onto the streets, and had said to him that we've got to open the economy up in a broader way, and none of that advice was heeded, and we are where we are. But there's certainly no opposition members, and to make matters worse, there's no opposition oversight of it because they've cut Parliament out completely. So it's impossible to be able to bring your thoughts and ideas to bear in a meaningful way. You have to make submissions and hope that they read them. And certainly in Minister Patel's case, it doesn't look like he did.
Guy Hamlin asked a question which I think you've already answered. Does the president consult with you, John, on anything?
The president does consult, and we've had 2 Zoom meetings and 1 face-to-face meeting. But I get the sense, certainly from the last one, that it's more of a tick box exercise, because we've made detailed proposals, detailed positions. When the level 4 regulations were advertised, we made a comprehensive 17-page contribution into how it could be made to work better and why they were so those regulations were the wrong ones for the time. And we didn't even get a formal response to it. But it doesn't matter. We're going to carry on doing it. We're going to keep putting solutions on the table and putting out our own stall. And if they take the advice, that's great. If they don't, that's their own peril. And if they just listened to us on this e-commerce thing right from the beginning, they would not have had to make the embarrassing U-turn that was required last week on e-commerce. And thank goodness they did.
I haven't had a chance to look at it. It's how many people in South Africa, what percentage of the eligible voters actually vote in a national election here?
Last election was quite high. I think it was over 60%, which is pretty good in terms of international averages. But the big worry is that young people are the largest group of voters who are not coming out to vote. And I think for many of them, they just don't see politics as a means to resolving their issues or as a means to finding solutions. And that's on us as political parties. And I think that what younger people are looking for is parties that are able to define better how they're going to make life better for them and make parties relevant to them. And so certainly we've got a much bigger focus now on trying to interact with younger voters where they are, on university campuses, on social media, the like. We've moved our entire messaging platform almost away from the traditional forms of media to platforms like this. I do a twice weekly show now called CoronaCast, which is broadcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. And we connecting with hundreds of thousands of voters who would never have gone to a political meeting or logged in. And I think it's a wave of the future for us, direct communication, where we're able to get a message directly into people's living rooms without being filtered, by the SABC or ENCA or others. We can communicate directly with people, far more effective.
Bernard Rose asked a question which relates to that. He said, John, you seriously lost your cool with that journalist last week when she asked you who you were talking for. You didn't do yourself or the DA any favors. My question for you is, how does the DA plan to be a significant player in South African politics when the perception is that the DA just doesn't understand the ethos of the people and not just 20% of the people?
Well, look, I'll be the first to admit, I had a bad day. And, sportsmen have them, radio DJs have them, presenters have them, and you have a bad day. You don't get it right all the time. And, I was just frustrated at what was very clearly a journalist driving an agenda and who, was trying to play her political game rather than to give a fair shot at being able to share my views and opinions with them. And yeah, I lost my cool and I probably shouldn't have, but these things are a learning curve. And what I've certainly been very heartened with is the social media response. So John Speaks For Me was trending at #1 for most of the weekend, over 30 to 40,000 tweets of people saying, I'm unemployed, John speaks for me. And what was most heartwarming about that, the majority of them were Black South Africans that were saying, finally, somebody's actually, getting it and understands. So yes, he speaks for me. So, sometimes bad interviews can have good results. And in this case, it certainly looks like Mr. Rose is probably upset with me, but certainly the publicity and the overwhelming support I've received this weekend has been wonderful. But obviously, understanding the ethos of the people, I don't understand what that means, because, we see people as individuals, and to say that every citizen's got the same ethos, or if you belong to a certain race group, you have ethos X, and if you belong to another race group, you've got ethos Y. I think that we must just set out our stall in a positive, solutions-focused way. And South Africans who are looking for that alternative vision and looking for a way out of the terrible situation they're in are going to naturally gravitate to parties that offer a solution to how they can get out of it. So the old lazy days of politics, Zuma's bad, ANC corrupt, etc. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows why the economy is sitting where it is at the moment. Everybody knows why they're living in a shack. People know why their children are in a school where they've got 50 other learners in a class getting a substandard education. What people want to know is how you're going to fix it. And I think that a DA that plays in those spaces is a DA that's going to find natural traction with South Africans across all race groups and economic classes, and say, well, these people are actually speaking for me, and I like the idea about how they're going to fix my problem, and to try and get that through. That's the frame the DA's got to play in going forward. The days of just bashing on and how bad the ANC are, those are over. There's a lazy politics, and it was a lot easier when Zuma was there. Different match now with Cyril Ramaphosa in the presidency, and we've got to adapt. And I think that hopefully you would have noticed it already, but certainly going into the next election, I think you're going to see it a lot more.
A businessman, an entrepreneur actually, who dealt a lot with the bottom end of the pyramid, said the mistake that many people make is because people are poor, they think they're dumb. Anything but, he says. You want to test a product and you want to find out who are the sharpest consumers and the smartest people around. He said, just try the bottom end of the pyramid. Interesting. How do we mobilize ourselves, says Hayden Hamlet, online or offline, to support faster opening up of the economy? Almost all the people I know have stopped supporting the extended lockdown in light of available data locally and internationally. We can wait for the DA to run in its processes in the courts, but it feels like we should mobilize the public. Any suggestions?
Well, of course, I mean, the more, government's got websites, the presidency's got email addresses, the more citizens said, right, we've got a number of petitions running online, which we will be serving on both the president and parliament. But look, we're hoping that our constitutional court case is going to be heard quickly. That's why we've applied for direct access. So we're trying to get, the quickest way there. But of course, the easiest way was to keep pressure up on government. So write to the newspapers. Share on your social media, mobilize that way, because government will get the message, and they got it loud and clear on e-commerce, and we need to just keep the pressure up on all the other aspects of it. These things are they are politicians at the end of the day, and voter sentiment does matter to them. So the more South Africans we can get raising these issues, the better it's going to be.
John McMurray asks, did anyone else get the impression from the president's last address that he did not have the cabinet behind him? He seemed vague to me. You're an insider, John. What do you think?
Look, I mean, I know from my own sources within the ANC that there is a monumental battle going on, and it's manifesting itself in many, many ways. I think you've seen the tweets of Tito Mboweni and others, who are clearly frustrated with the whole issue around the economy and government, and clearly they're not winning, because when your finance minister puts on Twitter that he's got to swallow rocks, you've got to know that there's some heavy stuff going on there. So I think the internal fractions within the governing party have not gone away. I think they are still there, and I think the president is under pressure. But as I've said to him so many times, if you do the right thing, you've got our 85 votes in your corner. Bring the reforms to Parliament, table them. Let's vote on them. You've got the opposition on your side. You can survive a backbench rebellion. But the thing is that if Cyril Ramaphosa does not act now, by the time he does start to act, it's going to be way too late, and the economy is going to be too far gone for it to be rescued. And I think he's already given far too much ground to the RET faction within the ANC.
Chris asks, John, are you able to get insight into how the NCCC, I suppose that command council that you spoke about earlier, is making decisions, and what data that they are using?
Well, my view is they've got a big dartboard up in there, and they all throw darts at the dartboard, and the policy's made up on wherever it lands, because some of the stuff just does not make sense from an economic or an epidemiological way. So, as I said, those clothing regulations last week were something out of 1984, George Orwell. You can't buy a T-shirt unless you're going to wear it as an undergarment for warmth. I feel sorry for all the cashiers around the country. I mean, they expect customers to fill out a form promising not to wear it, as a normal T-shirt. It's just bizarre. And the military curfew was not necessary. And the thing that really makes me quite cross is that South Africans across the board, by and large, complied with the hard lockdown. There was a high 90% poll done by the HSRC, which found that over 90% of South Africans had complied with the lockdown where they could. And so it wasn't necessary then to deploy, 75,000 police, army personnel onto the streets to try and enforce a lockdown. It doesn't make sense. So I think the president's also squandered a lot of the goodwill by allowing these ministers to ride roughshod. And I think a lot of people now have just said, this is ridiculous. I'm not prepared to be put through this anymore. And I think that when you lose the buy-in and the compact with citizens in a situation like this, it's a very dangerous place to be, because, as I said the other day on when I made my address, that if you don't end the hard lockdown, the people are going to end the hard lockdown. And it wasn't a revolutionary incitement. It's just the reality. People will just, if people do not believe you're doing things for the right reasons and in good faith, they're simply going to disregard it and do what they want anyway. And I think you're starting to see that across all parts of South Africa.
Well, certainly the smokers are not abiding by the law at all. We've got so many questions. So I'm going to ask you just to indulge us for a little bit beyond 1 o'clock, if you don't mind, John. Wallace Isaac says, what is John's take on going back to schools, on the going back to schools uncertainty?
Well, look, I think that what has been very obvious is that the science is also moving, and there's a really good indication now that children are not as susceptible to COVID and are not necessarily the carriers that they were originally thought to be. So I think that we've got to try and save the academic year. We've got to try and save the academic year for a number of reasons. One, you're going to end up with a major jam in the schooling system where you're not going to have space for the grade next year that's got to have the intake, because you're not going to have the matric class leaving, and universities are going to have a terrible time where they're going to have no first year students because no one's going to. So we've got to try and save the academic year, but we've got to do it in a safe way. So schools are going to have to ensure that mask wearing, PPE and screening becomes an everyday occurrence and the new normal in the schooling environment. And it's going to have to be enforced in that learning environment. Easier said than done, but we've got some good people already looking at a plan to get schools back as quickly as possible to save the academic year. Because if we don't, wow, also the knock-on effect in the economy in terms of workers that are going to be entering the economy is another huge problem. So I think we've got to try and do what we can to save the academic year, even if it means scrapping holidays near the end of the year. But certainly the science that's coming out shows that the children are not nearly as susceptible as previously thought, and can relatively safely go back to school, provided the safety mechanisms are in place.
Well, then the science, as you say, the numbers are very clear. Again, Professor Levitt sent through his analysis of Europe, which 250 million people there, and the numbers show very clearly that 8% of the excess deaths, 8%, are of people under the age of 65. 50% of the excess deaths are people over the age of 80. So it's pretty clear now who this virus kills. There's a question here from João Felizardo, which I think is one that many are wanting to know. If it is a Disaster Management Act ruling the measures, why was Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma allowed to overrule the president, who's supposedly the commander-in-chief on cigarettes? I'm sure he's presumed.
Yeah, well, I don't think he was overruled. I think that as he's come out and said, it was a collective decision. I don't know why he announced that there was going to be tobacco and then did a U-turn on it, because I think it certainly made him look weak in the eyes of the nation, because he was essentially countermanded. But as I think as Tito let the cat out the bag through his Twitter account again, there was a vote and they lost the vote in the NCC. But I think it was a very silly thing to do, as I say, from an economic perspective as well. Certainly with tobacco, there's no argument that tobacco has no impact whatsoever on COVID-19 or the spreading thereof. And I think that one needs to look very carefully at who stood to benefit from the cigarette ban and the extension of it. And I think once one starts to join those dots, I think a picture starts to emerge of why this has been done and who's benefiting. Because I can tell you, there are people who are making billions of rands, and those people are very well connected to various politicians and political parties in this country, and they must be smiling all the way to the bank.
Last Thursday, we had Paul O'Sullivan on our Noontime Thursday webinar where he named names on exactly that point. So it's easy to go and look through, but I think that it's hardly a secret. Dina Chetty asks, notwithstanding when the lockdown is lifting, it has caused a lot of businesses to be in financial distress. What more can be done for these businesses or entrepreneurs?
Well, look, I think that government so if you look at the response from governments around the rest of the world, they've been able to pump huge amounts of money into the economy to keep those businesses going. What you need to do is to try and provide funding and a bridge so people can survive this until they can get back to normal. Government has not been able to come to the party in any majorly significant way, certainly not to the scale of many of those other countries, because our economy was in such a terrible state, and we can spend a whole nother show about why that was the case. But I think that there is some things government can do in the meantime, particularly local government, and I think they need to look at rates holidays, making sure that you can reduce the overheads. I think the banks need to come to the party in a bigger way as well, Alec. I think that the extending loan repayment periods and just giving businesses a 3 or 4 month breather to be able to just overcome most of their biggest expenses are their rentals and their business loans, and of course their employee costs. If we can just help them bridge those over the next 3 to 4 months, I think we'll be able to save many, many more businesses. The problem is that the TERS and the UIF is not getting into the system nearly quick enough. The stimulus packages, the money is not. Many companies say they've applied, they've heard nothing back from government, so it's not happening quickly enough. And I think that many businesses that were hanging on by their fingernails, if this lockdown carries on until the end of May, as the president intimated, I think many of them are going to go over the edge. They're not going to be able to keep their doors open or keep their employees on the payroll, and then we're going to have a major crisis on our hands of job business. And I think that the Treasury figures of 3 million unemployed is hopelessly underestimated. I think we could have between 7 to 10 million unemployed South Africans at the end of COVID, on top of the 10 million who had already lost their jobs prior to that because of the dire state of the economy. And that's going to be a socio-economic crisis, which is going to be of epic proportions. And that's why it's just foolhardy not to do what you can to save as many businesses as possible now, rather than trying to resuscitate the economy afterwards.
Stuart Pennington, the last of our questions. We've got 65 unanswered questions, I'm afraid, but we're going to have to put those on hold. Stuart asks, if you were in charge, what would you do this week?
What would I do this week? Well, I'd immediately, I'd put a proclamation out withdrawing the exercise regulation, the ban on tobacco and alcohol, and I would allow any business in the country that could fill out the self-assessment form that we provided government with, that can open safely, should be allowed to do so. And then I would immediately set about making sure that I put 1,000 Rand into every single grant recipient in the country's account, because what that'll do, what food parcels don't do, is stimulate both the demand and supply side of the economy. They'll be able to buy food that they want, and they'll be going to shopkeepers and buying that food in shops where they'd be able to spend that money. The shopkeeper's going to have income, government will get some VAT in, and you'll keep the economy moving. Just those things there, I think, would make a critical difference within a week.
You have a lot of small businesses as part of your constituency. What are they telling you?
They're saying help. They're saying we can't carry on anymore. And I've had a number of small business people on my CoronaCast show just saying, look, I mean, we're hanging by a thread. If the UIF doesn't come through, if the TERS doesn't come through, I can't keep my doors open anymore. And I've got my landlord breathing down my neck. I've got my bank manager on the phone. Things are tough. And many of them say that if they close now, they will never be able to reopen again. It just won't be possible. And that's why we've got to try and save small business. Small business is the engine room of job creation in the country. And so many households and livelihoods are intrinsically linked to small businesses in this country, that if small business fails, the country's going to fail, and that is a terrible, terrible prospect.
We've noticed in many parts of the economy that it's almost like the world has accelerated due to COVID-19. Some people put it at 3 years, others say even 5 years. What was going to happen at that point in time has just gone that quickly. What about politics? Politics is still an interesting anachronism in many ways. You mentioned earlier that 60% of the population voted at the last election, which is very high, which would say roughly 40% of South Africans voted for the ANC, which is now ruling as though it's ruling for 100%. So it doesn't even have half of the people in the country on its ballot box, if you like, yet it's ruling for 100%, which seems real crazy. The whole system where young people are being sacrificed, or their futures are being sacrificed, where a smart lockdown would not need to look after them, but look after older people. All of this must be keeping your mind occupied. How can you see the reimagination of politics into the future as a consequence of this?
I'm really excited about it, to be honest with you. And, you know, there hasn't been all negative here. I mean, it's forced us into doing direct communication with voters. We can't have town hall meetings anymore and, you know, have big rallies and full stadiums. So that certainly for the next 18 to 24 months is unlikely. So we've had to adapt, and parties that don't adapt die. And I think that we've gone into this thing swimmingly. We're now running our shadow cabinet meeting every second day via Zoom. We may actually meeting more now via Zoom than we ever met in person, and it's brought efficiency to me being able to run the party. In one day last week, I was able to address our caucus in Mangaung, in Nelson Mandela Bay, and in Buffalo City, and without having to book a single plane ticket, hire a single car, or book one night's accommodation. And I think it's going to do wonders for being able to far more consensus and transparency in how political parties run. And last week we piloted our first virtual town hall with the residents of Tshwane to unpack our court case, and it was really well attended on Zoom. And you know, it's going to be the new normal, and I think we're looking forward to that. The sad part for me is just to see how poorly Parliament has handled this whole situation. You know, Brazil, their parliament had their first virtual sitting on the 26th of March. The House of Commons is doing Prime Minister's questions via technology. Our parliament essentially sat on its hands for the first 5 weeks of the crisis and closed up when, you know, the maximum number of vigilance was required, when government had its strongest powers. And then when it did open up, it's been a complete dog show, and there's have not been able to get to grips with technology, and MPs are very generously provided with IT equipment and data and the like, and this is a time when we could have been putting that to good use. And just to see some MPs unable to log into Zoom and keep up with the modern world, yeah, I think it's been very, very disappointing. For me, it stands out one of the biggest disappointments as a parliamentarian is to see just how poorly our parliament has performed at this time. It's really let the people of South Africa down. And I think that the Speaker and the presiding officers are going to have a lot of answering to do when Parliament does get up and running properly, whenever that may be, because I think that they have not done right by the Constitution. They certainly haven't done right by the people who've elected us as Parliament to exercise oversight of the executive, to make laws, and to ensure accountability. I think we've done very, very poorly at it, and it's a shame because it could have been very, very different.
John, just to close off with, and it is getting back to the economy, how are you reading this? Where are we going to from here? Because already there's been enormous damage. Business for South Africa says the economy will contract 17% this year. If you take our recent growth rates, that's going to take a decade to just get back to where we were before COVID-19. How are you seeing things move out or play out from here?
Well, look, I think that the consensus is that the real battle is still to come. As I said earlier, the virus is the hill, the economy is the mountain, and it's going to be a very, very steep mountain, and there's going to be a lot of pain. For the first time, I think that we've been in technical recession for the last 6 years. GDP growth has been surpassed by population growth, but that's by and large been that recession's been borne by the poor in South Africa. This depression that we're going to go into is going to wash very deeply into the middle class. And people you and I know, people our kids are at school with, are going to lose their jobs, they're going to lose their businesses, and they're going to lose their homes and their cars. And it's going to wash very, very deeply into the middle class. And I think that's going to have an absolute impact on South Africa going forward. So I think there's a lot of pain to come, and we need to. That's why we need to be now reoriented the party towards owning the recovery and putting on the table a blueprint. My worry is, and certainly it's the sound that you're hearing from government, is, well, let's just double down on the policies that got us into this mess in the first place. So you're talking now about, COVID's dealt finally with your SAA problem, but now we're talking about starting up a new state-owned airline out of the ashes of SAA. And we're not going to solve the problem that got us into this mess and get us out of this, but the very same paradigm of state control that got us into this mess. And so the more the state tries to own and direct the economy, the more it's actually going to wreck it. So I really, that's what worries me the most about what's going to happen, when we start dealing with the economic crisis. That government's going to say, well, just what would the answer to the problem is just a little bit more state control, a little bit more a monopoly for the state, a few more Escoms and the like. And it is the wrong medicine for the crisis that we're in. This is an opportunity for us to reset and to start adopting pro-growth policies that are able to get us off this low growth, high debt trajectory and high unemployment trajectory and onto one where we can actually get the economy growing again. And I think the president, if he grasps the moment, will be able to make this the turning point for South Africa. And so he's got a date with destiny, and he's going to have to think very carefully about, does he continue to pander to the RET faction, or is he going to do what needs to be done and bring those reforms to Parliament, table them, and let's get the country back on track and working again? And he'll have no bigger cheerleader or partner in growth than us on the opposition benches. We will help him ram through that agenda if it needs to be through Parliament. But he's now got to have the courage to bring it to the table and to stop pandering to the forces that have brought the country to its knees.
It's not as far-fetched as it sounds, but unfortunately, the high priestess of economic thinking in the ANC right now is a lady from London University called Mariana Mazzucato, who believes in the developmental entrepreneurial state. So, developmental state with a little twist. In a recent webinar that I was involved with, Martin Wolf from the Financial Times of London said, "We agree on most things, but I do not agree with you that the state is able to be as efficient as you think it has to be for your policies to work." So I guess there's many ideological battles still to come.
But I mean, I think that's exactly the problem. You see that, just a little bit more state control and we'll fix the problem. And it's not realizing it's the overweening state control that's got us into the problem in the first place. And I'm sorry, there is no capable state in South Africa. And I think that this crisis has shown that. When you can't even get UIF payments made on time when you need them, when you can't get basic systems, your SASSA systems paying people on time and the correct amount, that points to an incapable state. And when you start putting that incapable state in charge of the levers of the economy, you've got a recipe for disaster, which is why we were in the terrible situation going into this virus in the first place. That exact paradigm had pushed our boat very, very low in the water. And this is a chance for us to have a reset. And so it's going to be up to the president to grasp that moment and date with destiny, because if he misses it, he's going to be presiding over a catastrophic depression, and voters, particularly middle-class voters, don't generally tend to favor governments that drive into depression at the ballot box. And so there could be some problems ahead for him and his party.
John, before you go, David Shapiro has been very kindly waiting on the sidelines. David, would you like to pose a final question to the leader of the opposition?
I think it's more from an international situation. While I've been multitasking. I've been looking at the side. I've got a Bloomberg screen, and I see Xi Jinping has come out and said we need international cooperation in vaccine development. And he's actually mentioned aid to Africa. I think the question to John is, why have global governments performed so badly? Why were they caught with their pants down without any kind of plan? That includes ourselves as well, and they've been grasping for answers. Not one leader has covered himself or herself, I think the women have done better than the men, have covered themselves in glory. Why do we find politics so poor in handling a crisis? And I'm talking global politics. You know, why has there been no cooperation?
Well, I think, David, it's a very good question. And I think the problem lies, people haven't really prepared for this type of thing in the past. But also, I think that, politicians don't, they like to make decisions that look good in the public eye and, may not necessarily be, even though they may not necessarily, instead of actually making the necessary unpopular decisions. So I think it would be unpopular, as I was a few weeks ago, to say, let's open up the economy. We can't keep on like this. And, I got jumped on by, the Twitterati, the newspaper journalists, how can you be talking about livelihoods in a health crisis? But, and I think that many leaders have spectacularly got the balance wrong. And I think there's been too much talking and not enough listening. And so when you bring in experts, you must listen to them. And I think that's where politicians are very bad. So, for instance, Professor Karim has been telling us for the last 3 weeks that the lockdown has done its job. What you haven't been able to achieve now in a hard lockdown, you're not going to achieve anyway. And yet here we are, into another interminable week of hard lockdown that's killing the economy. So it's a lack of listening and wanting to talk rather than understanding the science and making decisions around that. And I think that it's a salutary lesson for politicians, both globally and locally, to make sure that you actually listen to what's being said and look at their advice, and that you move. It's all right to move your position if the science changes. You don't have to doggedly stick to a decision when the science tells you otherwise. And I think that we look across the pond. We had President Trump going on about chloroquine for months and months and months when science was telling him otherwise, but he doggedly stuck to that position. And I think that's where politicians are bad. They want to be right and they don't want to be proved wrong. I think the greater aspect of leadership is being able to be brave enough to listen to the advice and to change your position if a better argument is made.
Well, if you can imagine that we were in a hall and there were 625 people sitting still waiting. There've been over 800, so a couple of people have left. It would seem a little strange to say that we're going to bid you adieu, but I am going to, because I know you've got other fish to fry. But there's just one more question from Anna Forsman that I'd love to put to you, and this is in the context of what we are getting back, the feedback we're getting from people who are in the offshore investment field. They are saying never before have they seen so much demand by South Africans to take money and themselves away as soon as they're able to. As soon as they can get on a flight, according to the immigration experts in that field, they're saying that many people that they know are going to do that. And Anna says, for those of us who are still here, and I see on your card you say that you're passionate and optimistic about our future in South Africa. She says, what is the best action each individual South African can take right now to avoid being controlled by what she calls a power-hungry government?
Well, to make sure you're registered in vote. I think a lot of those people are leaving because they've witnessed the incapable state firsthand, and they've seen what the government is capable of doing. Helen Zille always famously used to say, power doesn't make you, it reveals who you are. And I think that the little bit of power that's been given to some of these ministers like Tele, Mbalula, Mapisa Nkakula, and Dlamini Zuma, we've started to see who they really are. They're authoritarian despots who love to be able to rule by decree and who don't like parliamentary oversight or the citizens to have a say. And have said, well, we know what's best for you and we are going to do it, and whether you like it or not. And I think that scared a lot of people. I mean, seeing the military on the streets and the like, this is not scenes that you see in a democracy usually. And I think it's rightly unsettled a lot of people who feel that they have been, given the mushroom treatment by their own government at this time, fed rubbish and kept in the dark. And government's dogged determination not to share the data, basically on the things, we don't want you to be scared. I mean, it's madness in a democracy that you're not prepared to do that. So I think it's a lot of people have seen government over this time, and they've not liked what they've seen. Is this what waits us in the future? And so I think that the big thing that people have to do is to make sure they don't remain passive observers in the country, that it's by joining hands with political parties, getting involved, citizen action groups, civic bodies, get involved and make sure that we entrench freedom in South Africa and that we don't diminish it. It is the new frontier that we all have to stand on to protect freedom, not only for ourselves, but for future generations of South Africans. And you can't adopt a position anymore in South Africa, say, well, I'm not interested in politics, because I think what the last few weeks have shown is that you may not be interested in politics, but politics is very interested in you and how you live your life. And get involved and vote. Make sure you vote at the very least, but also become an active citizen, actively fighting to keep that democratic space open. Because if you don't, it soon gets filled with the despots of the world.
John Steenhuisen is the leader of the Opposition Democratic Alliance in South Africa. And as you can see from his card, he's a young achiever, age 22. He was elected to the Durban City Council and relatively young to be in leading a major political party. Thank you for giving us so much time today, John, and for answering as forthrightly as you have, and for not losing your cool. But as you say, it's all a learning curve. It's been good. It's been good being with you today, and we do appreciate all the efforts that you're making on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and long may platforms like this last. I mean, it's really great to be able to speak to you and to be with all the people on your webinar. And I think we need to get more politicians being held accountable like this. I think it's always a good thing.
Indeed. Thank you, John. David Shapiro, before we close off today, it's been a fascinating discourse. Having, first of all, unfortunately, Frans Cronje he warned me the cell phone tower in his area was taken down for maintenance 15 minutes before he came on air. So he did ask Hermann to step in and help, and I think he did a pretty efficient job. But we'll get Frans back at some time in future. Thanks to the literally hundreds of questions that have come in, and you can see that it is an extremely busy mind space that we're working in at the moment with the lockdown. Why we're not seeing the sense in it anymore. And why citizens are getting pretty agitated. John seemed to have some good answers there.
He handled himself brilliantly, I think, very articulately. You couldn't trap him. He was able to answer every question. Yes, politicians are always well prepared, but I think there's a lot of sense in what he says. And I'm not coming in. I avoid politics. I look at the business side of things because I think business drives an economy. It's really, I think we all want one thing, and that's a thriving economy, that we can just live a normal life, that everybody's got the dignity of a job and can pay down one's expenses, pay down the mortgage. And I think it's a route that we have to start looking at. Alec, I'm particularly worried. I'm particularly worried in a lockdown basis because if you look at the pillars of the South African economy, it's mainly been around mining, to an extent manufacturing, and the one area that we could really thrive in has been the tourist side of things, and that's the one where we're vulnerable. So we've got to be, that any plan has embraced tourism, and that's an area that's going to hurt us. It's going to be a long time before that comes back to normal. So I think we need some very deep thoughts into how we're going to get ourselves out of this, even when lockdown comes. How are we going to get people back working and money flowing again? So we're in warring times, and I think that requires cooperation. From all sides, from everybody. And the sooner we start on that, the sooner we start on that path, the better.
I liked what John was saying about the 85 seats that the DA has in the House. that they would support any sensible restructuring of the economy. And now, surely to goodness, that penny has to have dropped. You can't go into a depression, which clearly we are going to enter, thinking that we will be able to use Soviet-style policies, which unfortunately is the headspace of many people in the Ramaphosa administration, and just get us out of it. The money is up, as is often the most sobering attitude is when your bank account is run dry. Then you do start realizing that the party is over and you need to look at things very differently. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the silver lining on this cloud.
Well, this developmental economy is not going to work, and for the simple reason is I don't think we've got the skills. The skills are in the economy. If you dig deep in the private sector, you're going to find the skills. You're going to find the kind of people that can actually get us out simply through entrepreneurship, and it's not confined to a color. There's many bright people within this economy, and you've just got to tap into those resources, but you're not going to do it alone. You need to, and that's the kind of question that I was asking that just I cannot come to terms with, is the way that government, that global leaders are approaching this, and particularly, as he said, over the water, meaning Trump, who is now embarking on a bashing, and he's Peter Navarro, who's one of his trade commissars, is saying that China put people who were infected and sent them around the world. I mean, that's crazy thinking. You're not going to win the battle like that. The only way we're going to win the battle is through cooperation. So I'm saying it's not only global cooperation, it's cooperation here within our economy as well, within our political economy as well. So the sooner we get down to it, and I think Tito knows what has to be done, and I think there are a lot of people within the ANC, they've just got to have the courage to actually stand up and plot that path or define that path.
Well, when people like Professor Ian Vlok at Stellenbosch University, who's the head of neurosurgery there and also a teaching professor, tells us, as he did 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the lockdown has served its purpose. The health services cannot get better prepared. They're as well prepared as they can. They've got their PPEs. Please don't kill the economy in trying to protect us. When you hear that kind of discussion and it falls on deaf ears, you have to wonder what it's going to take for the message to finally get through. But on Thursday, we've got the 2 co-authors of the Panda report, and they will both be on our webinar. That's Peter Castleton and Nick Hudson. Both of them are actuaries, so they have no axe to grind either side. In fact, they came with that very famous Charlie Munger approach of invert, always invert. If you want to try and prove something, first try to disprove it, try to turn it on its head. And that's how they approached the whole actuarial project, where they looked at what the economic damage does to poverty and what poverty does to mortality rates. And they've calculated that at a minimum, the poverty coming from the lockdown, which I guess they were talking, their report was a couple of weeks ago, would be 29 times more people would die as a consequence of poverty than would die as a consequence of COVID-19 as a starting point. And then we'll also have Ray Cadies, who's a gent who I'm sure you recall well. He started Cadies and he's got Constellation Capital, very outspoken, a Bites scholar to Oxford, Harvard MBA, retired at 42 and is now, he's back in business, but he's become obsessed by COVID-19. Posts over Facebook, got an army of followers. He'll be the third of our panelists. So Thursday's noontime webinar promises to be very, very interesting in tackling that subject. But David, as always, thank you for the contribution and the sharing that you gave us today, and look forward to our Rational Radio next Monday.
Oh, thanks.